The moment that police officer pulled my daughter-in-law over for speeding, he handed me a folded paper and destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. He checked Amanda's license, looked at me sitting in the passenger seat, and said, "Ma'am, don't go home with her. Find somewhere safe." When I unfolded that paper and saw Amanda's photo with a different name underneath, I realized I'd been living with a dangerous stranger for 2 years. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how I got here, sitting in that police cruiser at 67 years old, discovering my son had married a professional con artist named Rebecca Torres, who was wanted in 3 states. It started as such an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Cedar Falls. Amanda had offered to drive me to my eye doctor appointment, which should have been my first clue something was wrong. In the 2 years since she'd married my Brian, Amanda Miller had never volunteered for anything that didn't benefit her directly. But I was grateful for the ride since my vision had been blurry lately, and Brian was working another double shift at the plant. "How are you feeling about the new glasses prescription, Dot?" Amanda asked as we drove down Highway 58. Her voice had that honeyed quality I'd learned to distrust. "Fine, dear. Just need some adjustment time." I studied her profile as she drove. At 36, Amanda was strikingly beautiful, with platinum blonde hair and green eyes that seemed to catalog everything around her. Sometimes I caught her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, like she was calculating something. "You know, I was thinking," she continued, "maybe it's time we talked about your living situation. That big house is getting to be too much for you." There it was, the real reason for her sudden helpfulness. For months, Amanda had been dropping hints about me moving into senior living, selling my home of 38 years. The house Frank and I had bought as newlyweds, where we'd raised Brian, where Frank had died in my arms 18 months ago. "I managed just fine," I said firmly. Amanda's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "But what if something happens? What if you fall? Brian worries constantly about you being alone." "Does he?" I turned to look at her directly. "Because when I see Brian, he seems more worried about working enough overtime to pay for that new truck you wanted." The speedometer needle crept higher. Amanda always drove faster when she was angry. "That truck is practical, Dot. Brian needs reliable transportation for work." A $60,000 pickup truck was Amanda's idea of practical. Just like the kitchen renovation that cost more than I'd made in my last year of teaching. Just like the Disney cruise they'd taken for their anniversary while Brian worked 70-hour weeks. "Of course, dear," I said mildly, which only made her press the accelerator harder. We were doing 75 in a 65 zone when the siren started. "Great," Amanda muttered, pulling over with theatrical reluctance. "Just perfect." The state trooper was young and professional, asking for license and registration. Amanda handed them over with a charming smile that had worked on every man since she'd arrived in Cedar Falls. "Ma'am, were you aware you were going 75 in a 65 zone?" "I'm so sorry." "Officer, I was just trying to get my mother-in-law to her doctor's appointment on time. She's been having vision problems, and I was worried about the traffic." Using my medical appointment as an excuse while simultaneously suggesting I was impaired. Clever. The trooper glanced at Amanda's license. Then at me. Something in his expression changed. "Step out of the vehicle, please, ma'am." "Is that really necessary? We're running late." "Step out of the vehicle." Amanda's charm faltered. She got out of the car, and I watched through the windshield as the trooper led her to the back of his cruiser. They stood there for several minutes, him speaking into his radio, her gesturing emphatically. Then he walked to my side of the car. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me. Ma'am, don't go home with her. Find somewhere safe." The trooper's words echoed in my mind as I stared at the paper he'd pressed into my hands. Rebecca Torres, wanted for fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. The woman in the photo was definitely Amanda, but the eyes were different. Harder, more predatory. "Officer, there must be some mistake," I said, though my voice sounded strange even to myself. "No mistake, ma'am. This woman has been using multiple identities for over a decade. Amanda Miller is just her latest creation." He glanced back toward the patrol car where Amanda sat in handcuffs, no longer the sweet daughter-in-law who worried about my vision appointments. "But she's married to my son. They have a life together." "I'm sure she does. These people are experts at building believable lives. The question now is, what do you know about her activities? Has she had access to your finances? Your personal information?" My mouth went dry. Last month, Amanda had offered to help me organize my paperwork. She'd been so insistent, so helpful, staying late to sort through my files while I made dinner. I'd been grateful for her attention. She helped me with some banking, I admitted. The officer's expression grew grim. Ma'am, I need you to call someone you trust to pick you up. Don't go home until we've processed this arrest. And first thing tomorrow, check your credit report and bank statements. As I sat in that police cruiser calling my neighbor Helen, I kept staring at the photo. Rebecca Torres looked like Amanda, but this woman had been arrested in Michigan for bilking an elderly man out of his life savings. Before that, she'd been caught running a romance scam in Ohio. The pattern was always the same: identify vulnerable targets, gain their trust, empty their accounts. Helen arrived 30 minutes later, her gray hair wild from rushing out of her house without her usual careful styling. "Dorothy Sullivan, what in the world is going on?" I showed her the paper. Helen had been my neighbor for 15 years, had watched Brian grow up, had brought casseroles after Frank's funeral. If anyone would believe me, it would be Helen. "Dear Lord," she breathed. "This is Amanda?" "The police say her real name is Rebecca Torres. She's wanted in multiple states." Helen studied the photo, her lips pressed thin. "You know, I never trusted that girl. Too polished, too perfect, like she'd practiced being charming in front of a mirror." We spent the evening at Helen's house, going through everything I could remember about Amanda's arrival in Cedar Falls. She'd met Brian at the hardware store where he was buying supplies for my leaky roof. Love at first sight, she'd called it. Now I wondered if she'd been trolling for targets, looking for hard-working men with assets to exploit. "What are you going to tell Brian?" Helen asked as we sat drinking tea at her kitchen table. That was the question keeping me awake. Brian adored Amanda. He'd been lonely for so long after his divorce, had worked so hard to build a good life. Finding Amanda had made him happier than I'd seen him since he was a child. "How do you tell your son that his wife is a criminal?" "I don't know," I admitted. "He won't believe me. He'll think I'm jealous or confused. The police have evidence. Amanda will have explanations. She's been explaining things away for 2 years, and I believed every word." Helen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Brian's a good man, Dorothy. When he sees the truth, he'll do the right thing." But as I lay awake in Helen's guest room that night, I couldn't shake the memory of how quickly Amanda's mask had slipped when the trooper approached. For just a moment, her face had shown something cold and calculating, like she was already 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Brian's face went through a dozen emotions when I told him about Amanda's arrest the next morning. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked like relief, which surprised me most of all. "Mom, this is insane. There has to be some explanation." We were sitting in my kitchen, the same place where I'd told him his father was sick, where we'd planned Frank's funeral, where we'd had every important conversation of his adult life. But this felt different, dangerous. The police showed me her photograph, Brian. Multiple identities, multiple arrests. People can look alike. You said yourself your vision's been blurry. I pulled out the printout I'd gotten from the police station. Rebecca Torres, born March 15th, 1995. That would make her 29, not 36, like she told you. Brian barely glanced at the paper. "This is ridiculous. Amanda's never hurt anyone. She takes care of our home. She takes care of me." "With what money, Brian? You work 70-hour weeks to pay for her lifestyle. We have expenses, the house, the truck payments, her medical bills." "What medical bills?" This was new information. Brian looked uncomfortable. "She's been seeing specialists in Chicago. Some kind of hormonal issue. The treatments are expensive, but insurance doesn't cover experimental procedures." My heart sank. Another lie, another manipulation. "Brian, when was the last time you actually saw a medical bill, a doctor's name, an insurance claim?" "She handles all that stuff. I'm working too much to deal with paperwork." "Or she's making sure you never see the paperwork." Brian stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "I'm not listening to this anymore. You've never liked Amanda, and now you're using some mistaken identity thing to attack her. I'm trying to protect you." "From what? From being happy? From having someone who loves me?" The pain in his voice nearly broke my resolve. Brian had been through so much. His divorce had devastated him, left him convinced he wasn't worthy of love. When Amanda had swept into his life with her beauty and attention, he'd blossomed like a plant finally getting sunlight. Brian, please, just look at the evidence. What evidence? Some papers from a police officer who probably made a mistake running her license? Some website printout that could be about anyone? He walked to the window overlooking my backyard, the same view he'd had as a child when he'd sit at this table doing homework. You know what I think happened? I think you're lonely, Mom. I think you're angry that I found someone who makes me happy. And you can't stand not being the most important woman in my life anymore. The accusation hit like a physical blow. That's not true, isn't it? Ever since Amanda and I got serious, you've been critical of everything. The way she dresses, how she spends money, her friends, her family. You've never given her a real chance. Because something felt wrong about her from the beginning. Brian turned back to me, and I saw Frank in his face, the same stubborn set of his jaw when he'd made up his mind about something. Amanda posted bail this morning. She's at home waiting for me, probably scared and confused about why she was arrested for something she didn't do. And instead of supporting my wife, I'm here listening to conspiracy theories from my mother. Brian, please. No, Mom. I love you, but I love her too. And right now, she needs me more than you do. He left without another word, and I sat in my empty kitchen staring at the evidence that would never be enough to convince him. 3 weeks passed without a word from Brian. I'd drive by their house sometimes, see Amanda's car in the driveway, the lights on in the evening, normal life continuing as if nothing had happened. She'd gotten the charges dismissed somehow, claiming mistaken identity and providing documents that proved she was Amanda Miller, born and raised in Illinois. Helen thought I should let it go. Maybe you were wrong, Dorothy. Maybe it really was a case of mistaken identity. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen in Amanda's face that day, the cold calculation behind her eyes. So I did something I never thought I'd do at 67. I became a detective. It started small. I drove to the library and used their computer to research everything I could find about Amanda Miller. Her social media profiles were perfect, too perfect. Photos going back exactly 3 years, right around the time she'd moved to Cedar Falls. Nothing before that. No childhood friends tagging her in throwback photos, no family members wishing her happy birthday, no college roommates reminiscing about old times. Most people's social media goes back years, I told Helen. Amanda's digital life started the day she arrived here. Maybe she's just private. Or maybe Amanda Miller didn't exist before Cedar Falls. I started paying attention to things I'd overlooked before. Amanda claimed to be from Rockford, Illinois, but she'd never once mentioned specific places, schools, or childhood memories. When Brian had suggested visiting her hometown for their anniversary, she'd quickly changed the subject, claiming her childhood was too painful to revisit. Then I noticed the mail. I was walking past their house one morning when I saw Amanda collecting letters from their mailbox. Most were addressed to Brian or both of them, but one envelope was addressed to Rebecca Chen. She glanced around nervously before quickly shoving it into her purse. Rebecca, the same first name as Rebecca Torres. That afternoon, I did something that would have horrified my former teacher's sense of propriety. I waited until Brian left for work and Amanda drove to her weekly shopping trip. Then I went through their garbage. Most of it was ordinary household trash, but at the bottom of one bag, I found something that made my hands shake. A credit card statement for Rebecca Chen, showing purchases in Chicago on dates when Amanda claimed to be having medical treatments. But these weren't medical expenses. Designer clothing, expensive restaurants, a hotel room for 2 people. She was living a double life, literally. But the real discovery came when I found a bank deposit slip. Amanda had deposited a check for $12,000 from something called Midwest Investment Services. The notation on the slip said, consultation fee. I researched Midwest Investment Services at the library. It was a company that specialized in helping people liquidate assets quickly, often for clients going through divorces or bankruptcy. The kind of company you'd use if you needed to convert someone's belongings into cash without leaving paper trails. My blood ran cold as I realized what this might mean. Amanda wasn't just stealing from Brian through fake medical expenses and lifestyle manipulation. She was positioning herself to strip him of everything he owned. That night, I called the police station and asked to speak with the trooper who'd arrested Amanda. Ma'am, I remember you. Has something else happened? Officer, I think my daughter-in-law is planning something bigger than just fraud. I think she's planning to disappear with my son's assets. What makes you think that? I told him about the credit card statement, the bank deposits, the consultation fees from a liquidation company. Ma'am, that's concerning, but unless your son is willing to file a complaint, there's not much we can do. Married couples have access to joint accounts. What if she's done this before? What if there are other victims? A pause. I'll make some calls. In the meantime, document everything you find. And ma'am, be careful. If she realizes you're investigating her, she might accelerate whatever timeline she's working on. As I hung up the phone, I realized the horrible irony of my situation. The more evidence I gathered, the more danger Brian was in. And the only person who could protect him was the one person who refused to believe he needed protection. The flowers arrived on a Thursday morning, 24 white roses with a card that read, "Thinking of you during this difficult time, Amanda." As if my son's wife sending me sympathy flowers wasn't strange enough, the timing made my skin crawl. It had been exactly 1 week since I'd called the police about her liquidation activities. Helen found me staring at the arrangement when she came by with my mail. "Those are beautiful, Dorothy. What's the occasion?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." The card was expensive, heavy stock with embossed lettering. Amanda had never sent me flowers before, had never acknowledged my birthday or the anniversary of Frank's death. This gesture of false sympathy felt like a warning. "Maybe she's trying to make peace," Helen suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Or maybe she knows I've been asking questions." That afternoon, Brian called for the first time in a month. "Mom, I just wanted to see how you're doing." His voice sounded strained, tired. "I'm fine, honey. How are you?" "Busy. Work's been crazy, and Amanda's been having more health issues." "What kind of health issues?" A pause. "She's been having panic attacks, stress-related stuff. The doctor thinks it's because of all the trauma from that mistaken arrest." My heart clenched. Amanda was using Brian's protective instincts against him, positioning herself as a victim who needed his constant support. Maybe she should see someone local instead of those specialists in Chicago. "She needs specific treatment, Mom. These doctors understand her condition better." "Brian, have you ever actually spoken to one of these doctors? Seen a treatment plan?" Another pause, longer this time. "Amanda handles the medical stuff. I trust her judgment. But you're paying for treatments you've never seen evidence of." "Mom, please don't start this again." "I'm not starting anything. I'm asking reasonable questions about expensive medical care." "You know what? I think we need some space. Amanda's fragile right now, and your constant suspicion isn't helping her recovery." The line went quiet except for our breathing. "Are you saying you don't want to see me?" "I'm saying maybe visits should wait until Amanda's feeling stronger." "Brian, she's isolating you from your family. She's protecting herself from people who want to hurt her. There's a difference." After he hung up, I sat holding the phone, understanding with crystal clarity what was happening. Amanda was systematically cutting Brian off from anyone who might question her story or influence his decisions. First me, then probably his friends, eventually his co-workers. By the time she was ready to disappear with his assets, he'd have no one left to turn to for perspective or support. But Amanda had made one mistake. She'd underestimated a retired school teacher's ability to recognize manipulation when she saw it. That evening, I drove to the hardware store where Brian worked. I waited in the parking lot until his manager, Tom Rodriguez, came out for his smoke break. "Mrs. Sullivan, haven't seen you in a while. How's Brian doing?" "That's what I wanted to ask you, Tom. Has he seemed different lately? Distracted or stressed?" Tom's expression grew concerned. "Actually, yeah. He's been making mistakes, forgetting things. Last week he almost injured himself because he wasn't paying attention to the saw blade. I've been wondering if everything's okay at home. He says Amanda's been having health problems." Tom took a long drag of his cigarette. "You know, that's interesting, because last month when Brian asked to pick up extra shifts to pay for medical bills, I offered to help him look into the company insurance options. Maybe we could cover more of the costs." "What did he say?" "He said Amanda preferred to handle the insurance stuff herself. But Mrs. Sullivan, I've been doing this job for 20 years. When people have serious medical expenses, they take all the help they can get. They don't turn down better insurance coverage." Tom's words confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Amanda wasn't just hiding her fake medical expenses from Brian, she was actively preventing him from discovering the truth. "Tom, if Brian seems to be in trouble, would you call me?" "Of course. That boy's like family to me." As I drove home, I realized Amanda's flowers weren't a peace offering or a warning. They were a taunt. She knew I was on to her, and she was confident enough in her control over Brian to mock my powerlessness. But she'd made another miscalculation. She assumed a grieving widow would be easy to intimidate. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: my hairdresser's cousin, who worked at the Illinois DMV. When I mentioned Amanda's supposed hometown of Rockford during my weekly appointment, Cheryl's eyes lit up with recognition. "Miller from Rockford? That's funny because my cousin Jenny processes license transfers. And she was just telling me about this weird case. Someone applied for an Illinois license using Amanda Miller's identity, but the paperwork didn't match up right." My hands gripped the arms of the salon chair. "What do you mean?" "Well, Jenny said it looked like someone had created a whole fake background. Birth certificate, social security records, employment history, all dated within the last few years. Like someone had built an entire identity from scratch." "Did your cousin report it?" "She tried to, but by the time she flagged it, the person had already gotten the license and disappeared." Jenny said it was the most sophisticated identity theft she'd ever seen. That evening, I called Jenny directly. She was hesitant to discuss DMV business, but when I explained that Amanda Miller was married to my son and I suspected fraud, her professional concern overrode her caution. "Mrs. Sullivan, what I'm about to tell you is unofficial, but I think you need to know. The Amanda Miller identity was created using a deceased infant's information. Someone found a baby who died in 1987 and built an entire adult life around that social security number. Is that common? It's a classic identity theft technique. You find someone who died young, assume their identity, and create a believable history. The problem is there are usually traces of the original person that don't match up." "What kind of traces?" "Medical records, school attendance, family connections. In Amanda Miller's case, everything before 2021 is either missing or fabricated." I felt sick. Not only was my son married to a criminal, but he was married to someone who didn't legally exist. "Jenny, is there a way to prove this?" "You'd need law enforcement to run a comprehensive background check. But Mrs. Sullivan, if this woman is using a stolen identity, she's probably got backup plans. Multiple identities, escape routes, financial preparations." After I hung up, I sat in my dark kitchen trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. Amanda wasn't just Rebecca Torres, the con artist from Michigan. She was someone else entirely, someone who'd been planning Brian's destruction from the moment she'd walked into that hardware store. But Jenny's words about backup plans haunted me. If Amanda had multiple identities, how many other lives was she living? How many other victims were there? The next morning, I drove to the library and spent 6 hours researching everything I could find about professional con artists and their methods. What I learned terrified me. These people often worked in networks, sharing information about targets and techniques. They maintained multiple identities simultaneously, sometimes juggling several relationships at once. Most disturbing of all, they often had accomplices who helped them disappear when their schemes were discovered. As I read case study after case study, one pattern emerged clearly. The victims who fought back early had the best chance of recovering their assets and their lives. The ones who waited, who hoped for the best, who gave their tormentors the benefit of the doubt, lost everything. I drove home with a sense of urgency I hadn't felt since Frank's final diagnosis. Brian was running out of time, whether he knew it or not. That evening, my phone rang. "Dorothy?" The voice was unfamiliar. An older woman with a slight southern accent. "Yes? My name is Margaret Hayes from Louisville, Kentucky. I got your number from a police officer in Iowa who said you might be dealing with someone called Amanda Miller." My heart stopped. "Yes, she's married to my son. Honey, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Amanda Miller destroyed my nephew's life 2 years ago. She took him for over $100,000 before she disappeared." "Are you certain it's the same person?" "I'm looking at her photograph right now. Same face, different name. She called herself Sarah Peterson when she was with my nephew, but it's definitely the same woman." Margaret's story was sickeningly familiar. Amanda had met her nephew at a grocery store, claimed to be a widowed nurse, moved in within weeks of meeting him. She'd isolated him from his family, convinced him she needed expensive medical treatments, and systematically emptied his accounts. The worst part, Margaret continued, was how she made him feel guilty for questioning her. By the end, he was apologizing to her for not trusting her enough. How did you find out the truth? She got greedy and tried to refinance his house without his knowledge. The bank called him directly, and that's when everything unraveled. What happened to her? Gone in the wind. Left a note saying she'd never loved him and disappeared with everything she could liquidate. My nephew found out later she'd been maintaining relationships with at least 2 other men during their entire marriage. Margaret's revelation hit me like cold water. Amanda wasn't just planning to rob Brian eventually. She was probably robbing other victims right now. Mrs. Hayes, would you be willing to talk to the police about what happened to your nephew? Honey, I've been waiting 2 years for someone to call me about that woman. I'll talk to anyone who'll listen. As we made plans for Margaret to contact the Iowa State Police, I realized Amanda had made her biggest mistake yet. She'd assumed her previous victims would be too ashamed to speak up, too isolated to compare notes. She was about to discover how wrong she was. Margaret Hayes wasn't Amanda's only previous victim. By the end of the week, I'd connected with 4 other families across 3 states, all telling variations of the same devastating story. Amanda Miller, Sarah Peterson, Jennifer Walsh, Lisa Chen. She'd used different names, but the pattern was always identical. She has a type, explained Detective Sarah Morrison when she called from Illinois. Hard-working men in their 30s and 40s, usually recently divorced or widowed, with stable jobs and assets, but not much experience with sophisticated manipulation. That describes Brian perfectly. These women are experts at reading vulnerability. Mrs. Sullivan, they can spot emotional needs from across a room. Detective Morrison had been tracking Amanda's network for 18 months. What she'd discovered chilled me to the bone. She's not working alone. There's a group of them, sharing information about targets, teaching each other new techniques. They have a whole system for creating identities, establishing credit histories, even coaching each other on regional accents and local knowledge. A system? Think of it as a criminal franchise. They scout locations, identify suitable targets, then deploy whoever fits the profile best. Amanda specialized in small Midwest towns where people are trusting and background checks are casual. How many victims are there? That we know of? At least 12 in the last 5 years, probably more. The total loss is approaching $2 million. I had to sit down. Amanda hadn't just stumbled into Cedar Falls looking for a quick score. She'd researched our town, studied our residents, and selected Brian as carefully as a scientist choosing a lab specimen. Detective Morrison, what's their end game? Do they just disappear with whatever money they can steal? Sometimes, but we're seeing more sophisticated operations lately. Identity theft, credit fraud, real estate scams. One victim in Wisconsin discovered his wife had secretly mortgaged his house and transferred the deed to a shell company. My blood ran cold. Brian and Amanda had been talking about refinancing their house to pay for her medical treatments. Detective, I think Amanda might be planning something like that here. Mrs. Sullivan, I need you to document everything you can find. Bank statements, credit card bills, any legal documents. If she's following her usual pattern, she's probably 2 to 3 weeks away from disappearing. That evening, I did something that would have horrified my Methodist upbringing. I broke into my son's house. Brian was working a double shift, and Amanda had mentioned she'd be at her book club meeting until 10 o'clock. I used the spare key Brian had given me years ago, the one Amanda had repeatedly suggested he should take back. The house felt different at night, larger and more threatening. I moved carefully through rooms I'd helped Brian paint and decorate, looking for evidence of the life Amanda had been hiding from him. In the master bedroom, I found Amanda's real workspace. Hidden behind winter clothes in the walk-in closet was a small filing cabinet I'd never noticed before. Inside were documents that made my hands shake. Multiple driver's licenses with Amanda's photo, but different names, credit cards in those same identities, and most damning of all, real estate documents showing that Amanda had already transferred partial ownership of Brian's house to something called Midwest Holdings LLC. But the worst discovery was in the bottom drawer, a detailed timeline written in Amanda's handwriting outlining her entire relationship with Brian. Meeting him at the hardware store hadn't been coincidence. She'd been watching him for weeks, learning his schedule, his interests, even his late wife's favorite flowers, so she could claim to love the same varieties. The timeline showed her original plan. 6 months to gain his trust, another 6 months to access his finances, then disappear before their first anniversary. But something had changed her strategy. At the bottom of the page, written in red ink, were the words, "Extended timeline, additional asset discovered." What additional asset? Brian didn't have investments or inheritance she didn't already know about. Then I saw it. Clipped to the back of the timeline was a copy of Frank's obituary from the local newspaper. Someone had highlighted the part about his life insurance policy and the phrase, "survived by his devoted wife Dorothy." Amanda wasn't just planning to rob Brian. She was planning to rob me too. The next morning, I called Detective Morrison with trembling hands. "She knows about my husband's life insurance money," I told her. "She's been planning to steal from me all along." "Mrs. Sullivan, are you somewhere safe right now?" "I'm at home." "Why?" "Because if Amanda realizes you've discovered her plans, you could be in physical danger. These people don't just disappear quietly when they're cornered. Sometimes they escalate." As if summoned by our conversation, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Amanda standing on my porch, holding a casserole dish, looking like the perfect daughter-in-law she'd never actually been. "Detective Morrison, she's at my door right now." "Don't let her in. Can you pretend you're not home?" Too late. Amanda had seen my shadow in the hallway. "Dorothy, I know you're in there. I brought you that tuna casserole you love." I'd never expressed any fondness for tuna casserole. This was psychological manipulation, creating false memories of kindness between us. "Mrs. Sullivan, are you there?" Detective Morrison's voice was urgent through the phone. "I have to answer," I whispered. "If I don't, she'll know something's wrong." I opened the door with the chain lock still attached. "Hi, Amanda. This is a surprise. I was hoping we could talk." Amanda's smile was perfect, but her eyes were calculating. "I feel like there's been tension between us, and I want to clear the air. This isn't a good time. Please, Dorothy. It'll just take a few minutes. Brian's been so worried about our relationship." The mention of Brian was strategic. She knew I'd do anything to avoid causing him more stress. Against my better judgment, I removed the chain and let her in. Amanda walked directly to my kitchen as if she owned the place, setting down the casserole and opening my refrigerator to put it away. The casual familiarity was unnerving. "You have such a lovely home," she said, though her eyes were cataloging everything valuable. Frank had excellent taste. "What did you want to talk about?" Amanda sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd learned the truth about her identity 3 weeks ago. "I think there's been some misunderstanding about my arrest. I know the police spoke with you, and I'm afraid they might have given you the wrong impression." "What impression would that be? That I'm some kind of criminal?" "Dorothy, that whole thing was a case of mistaken identity. My lawyer proved it was all a big mistake." She leaned forward, her expression earnest and concerned. "But I'm worried that you still have doubts about me. Brian mentioned you've been asking questions about my medical treatments, my background, even my spending habits." So Brian was reporting our conversations back to her. The isolation was more complete than I'd realized. "I'm naturally curious about the people my son cares about." "Of course you are. You're a protective mother. I admire that." Amanda's tone was patronizing now, the kind of voice people use with confused elderly relatives. But sometimes curiosity can be misinterpreted as suspicion, and that creates unnecessary tension in families. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to trust me, to give me the benefit of the doubt instead of looking for problems that don't exist." Amanda reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was cold. "Brian loves us both, Dorothy, but he's caught in the middle of whatever conflict you think exists between us. It's not fair to put him in that position." The manipulation was masterful. She was making me responsible for Brian's stress while positioning herself as the reasonable peacemaker. "You're right," I said carefully. "Family harmony is important." Amanda's smile brightened. "I knew you'd understand. Brian will be so relieved." "I do have one small question, though." "Of course. If your name is Amanda Miller, why did I find credit cards and driver's licenses in your bedroom closet with the names Sarah Peterson, Jennifer Walsh, and Lisa Chen?" The change in Amanda's expression was instantaneous and terrifying. The sweet, concerned mask vanished, replaced by something cold and predatory. You broke into my house. I used the key Brian gave me years ago. You had no right to go through my personal belongings. Amanda's voice was different now, harder and more controlled. This was Rebecca Torres speaking, not the carefully constructed Amanda Miller persona. Those documents belong to me. You don't understand the context. Then explain it to me. Amanda stood up abruptly, and I noticed she was positioned between me and the door. You're not going to drop this. Are you, Dorothy? No, I don't think I am. Amanda laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was the laugh of someone who'd finally stopped pretending. You know what your problem is, Dorothy? You're too smart for your own good. Most of these small-town mothers-in-law are so desperate for their sons to be happy. They ignore obvious red flags. But not you. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It's supposed to be a warning. Amanda walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street. You've been very busy lately, haven't you? Making phone calls, asking questions, playing amateur detective. I've been protecting my son. You've been ruining a perfectly good operation. Amanda turned back to me, and the woman I was looking at bore no resemblance to the sweet daughter-in-law who'd been worried about my vision problems a month ago. How long have you known? Since the day that trooper handed me your photograph. Rebecca Torres, wanted in 3 states for fraud and identity theft. That was unfortunate timing. I was planning to phase out the Rebecca identity anyway, but having it surface in the middle of the Brian operation complicated things. The clinical way she talked about my son as an operation made my stomach turn. What's your real name? Amanda shrugged. Does it matter? I've been so many people. I barely remember the original. Let's just say I'm someone who recognized a long time ago that playing by society's rules is for suckers. And Brian? What was he to you? Brian was supposed to be easy money. Nice guy, steady job, inherited a house, probably had some savings. I figured 6 months to clean him out, then disappear. But something changed your mind. Amanda's smile was ugly now. I discovered he had a recently widowed mother with a substantial life insurance settlement. Why settle for $30,000 or $40,000 when I could get 10 times that amount? So you decided to stay. I decided to expand the operation. Brian was useful for gaining access to you, and you were the real prize. A lonely widow with money and no one to protect her interests. The casual cruelty of her planning took my breath away. She'd spent 2 years studying my grief, my vulnerabilities, my relationship with Brian, all so she could rob me more efficiently. The medical expenses were fake, every single one, though I did enjoy those trips to Chicago. Amazing what you can do with a fake medical excuse and a trusting husband. And the book club meetings? Training sessions mostly. Learning new techniques, sharing information about targets. We have quite a network. Dorothy, professional women helping each other succeed in a male-dominated world. Her joke about criminal conspiracy being feminist empowerment would have been funny if it weren't so chilling. What happens now? Amanda checked her watch. Now you're going to help me accelerate the timeline. Brian won't be home for 4 hours, which gives us plenty of time to visit your bank. I'm not giving you my money. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, Brian's going to have a very tragic accident at work tomorrow. Industrial accidents happen all the time at hardware stores. Saw blades malfunction, heavy machinery tips over, electrical systems spark. The threat against Brian hit me like a physical blow. You would hurt him? I would do whatever necessary to protect my investment. Brian's been useful, but he's not irreplaceable. You, on the other hand, are sitting on a substantial nest egg that I've spent 2 years positioning myself to access. Amanda pulled her cell phone from her purse and showed me a text message thread with someone named Marcus. My business partner is very good at arranging accidents. All I have to do is send him Brian's work schedule. The police know about you. Detective Morrison in Illinois has been tracking your network. Sarah Morrison? Amanda laughed again. Dorothy, Sarah Morrison doesn't exist. That was my partner Marcus using a burner phone. We've been monitoring your calls and leading you around by the nose for weeks. The revelation hit me like ice water. Every conversation I'd thought I was having with law enforcement had actually been with Amanda's accomplices, feeding me just enough real information to keep me believing while steering me away from genuine help. The other victims, Margaret Hayes? Oh, Margaret's real enough. But she's not talking to police, she's talking to us. We keep in touch with previous marks to see if they're causing problems. I felt sick. Amanda's network wasn't just stealing money. They were monitoring their victims indefinitely, making sure no one could expose their operation. So, what now? I asked, though I was already calculating distances to doors and wondering if my 70-year-old legs could outrun a woman 30 years younger. Now we're going to take a little trip to your bank. You're going to withdraw everything from your savings account. And then we're going to transfer ownership of this house to a shell company I've already established. And then? Then you're going to have a very sad accident. Natural causes, probably. A heart attack brought on by the stress of financial problems. These things happen to elderly people all the time. Amanda was no longer pretending to be anything other than a cold-blooded predator. Brian will inherit everything, of course, and as his devoted wife, I'll help him through his grief while managing his expanded assets. He'll figure out what you are eventually. Maybe. But by then, I'll have what I need and enough time to disappear properly. Brian can spend the rest of his life wondering what happened to his mother and his wife. Amanda moved toward me, and I realized she was probably carrying something to ensure my compliance. A weapon, drugs, some means of forcing me to cooperate. But Amanda had made one crucial mistake in her planning. She'd assumed that a retired schoolteacher would be helpless in the face of physical threats. She'd never considered that a woman who'd spent 30 years managing teenage boys might have learned a few things about handling dangerous situations. You know what, Amanda? You're absolutely right about one thing. I stood up slowly, keeping my movements calm and non-threatening. I am too smart for my own good. Good. Then you understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. You're a professional criminal who's been planning to murder me for my insurance money. I walked toward my kitchen counter, where I kept my medication organizer. But here's what you didn't consider in all your clever planning. Amanda watched me warily. What? You assumed I'd be too scared or too confused to fight back effectively. I opened my medication organizer and pulled out what looked like my daily blood pressure pills. But you see, I never actually took the blood pressure medication my doctor prescribed. What are you talking about? I've been dealing with anxiety since Frank died. Severe anxiety. My doctor gave me something much stronger to help me sleep. I held up the small pills. Lorazepam. Very effective for panic attacks. Also, very effective when dissolved in someone's drink. Amanda's expression changed as she realized what I was saying. You drugged the tea. I drugged the casserole, actually. The one you insisted on putting in my refrigerator yourself. I figured if you were planning to poison me, I might as well return the favor. As if on cue, Amanda's hand went to her forehead. The lorazepam I'd mixed into the tuna casserole would be taking effect about now. You're bluffing. Am I? How are you feeling, dear? A little dizzy? Having trouble focusing? I smiled at her with all the sweetness she'd been faking for 2 years. Those symptoms should get much worse over the next few minutes. Amanda grabbed the edge of the table for support. You drugged me. I protected myself. There's a difference. I'll call Marcus. He'll come get me. With what phone? I held up Amanda's cell phone, which I'd palmed from the table when she was busy threatening my son's life. You left this right here when you stood up to menace me. Amanda made a clumsy grab for the phone, but the medication was affecting her coordination. She stumbled and had to catch herself against the wall. You think you're so clever, but you have no idea what you're dealing with, she slurred. Marcus knows where I am. When I don't check in, he'll come looking. Will he? Because according to your text messages, Marcus thinks you're visiting your book club tonight. He's not expecting to hear from you until tomorrow morning. I'd been reading her messages while she was busy explaining her criminal empire. Plus, I've already sent some very interesting photos to the real police. Pictures of your fake identities, your timeline planning documents, and a lovely recording of you confessing to fraud and threatening to murder me. Amanda's face went white. Recording? I held up my phone. Speaker function is wonderful, isn't it? I've been live streaming our entire conversation to Detective Sarah Morrison, the real Detective Sarah Morrison at the Illinois State Police. That's impossible. Is it? You see, when I called the number you gave me for Detective Morrison and got a man named Marcus instead, I found that suspicious. So I looked up the Illinois State Police directory and called the real number. Amanda tried to move toward the door, but her legs weren't cooperating anymore. The real Detective Morrison has been waiting for someone to give her evidence about your network for 18 months. She was very interested to hear from me. You don't understand. There are others. They'll come for you. Will they? Because Detective Morrison assured me that your entire network is about to be rounded up simultaneously. Something about coordinated raids in 4 states. Amanda slumped into the chair she'd vacated 10 minutes earlier. The transformation from predator to victim was almost complete. "This isn't over," she mumbled. "Actually, it is. But don't worry about Brian. I'll make sure he understands that this wasn't his fault. You're very good at what you do, Amanda. Or Rebecca. Or whoever you really are." Red and blue lights flashed through my kitchen window as police cars pulled into my driveway. "The cavalry has arrived," I said cheerfully, "right on schedule." 6 months later, I was sitting in a courtroom watching Amanda Miller, a.k.a. Rebecca Torres, a.k.a. Sarah Peterson, a.k.a. Jennifer Walsh, receive a sentence of 15 years in federal prison. Brian sat beside me, still processing everything that had happened. "Mom," he said quietly as we watched the marshals lead Amanda away, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. You loved her. That's not something to apologize for. But you tried to warn me, and I treated you like you were some paranoid old woman." I patted his hand. "Brian, honey, what you experienced is called psychological manipulation. It's not your fault that you fell for it. Amanda and her associates are professionals. They've been perfecting these techniques for years." The real Detective Morrison approached us as we prepared to leave the courthouse. "Mrs. Sullivan, I wanted to thank you again. Your evidence broke this case wide open. What happens to the other victims? We're working on asset recovery. But it'll take time. The network had money hidden in dozens of accounts across multiple states. And the other members of their group? Arrested. All of them. Marcus Chen was the ringleader, by the way. He's looking at 25 to life." Brian shook his head. "I can't believe I was married to someone like that." "You weren't married to someone like that," I corrected him. "You were married to a fictional character that Amanda created specifically to manipulate you. The real Amanda, whoever she actually is, you never met." Detective Morrison nodded. "These criminals are experts at creating false personalities. They study their targets, learn their weaknesses, then become exactly what those targets want them to be." "How many people did they hurt?" "We've identified 47 victims over the past 8 years. Total losses exceeded $4 million. Brian went pale. $4 million. "Your mother prevented what could have been their biggest score," Detective Morrison said. "They'd been planning to take her for everything she had, plus use your assets as a base for expanding operations into Iowa." As we walked out of the courthouse, Brian was quiet for several blocks. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you know to start investigating Amanda? What made you suspicious?" I thought about his question. Honestly, it was little things that didn't add up. Her social media history starting exactly when she moved to Cedar Falls. Her reluctance to talk about her childhood. The way she always had explanations for everything, like she'd rehearsed her life story. I never noticed any of that. You weren't supposed to. She was very good at managing your attention, keeping you focused on work and financial stress so you wouldn't have time to ask difficult questions. But you noticed. Brian, I taught middle school for 30 years. I've seen every type of manipulation, every excuse, every attempt to avoid accountability. Amanda's techniques were more sophisticated than a 13-year-old's, but the underlying psychology was the same. We reached Brian's truck, and he paused with his hand on the door handle. "What happens now?" "Now you rebuild your life. You've got your house back, most of your savings recovered, and a better understanding of how to spot people who aren't what they seem. Are you going to be okay, living alone in that big house?" I smiled at my son. "Brian, I've been taking care of myself for 67 years. I think I can handle a few more. But what if someone else tries to target you? What if there are other criminals out there looking for vulnerable widows? Then they'll discover that this particular widow is not nearly as vulnerable as she appears." Brian hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom, and I'm proud of you for being stronger than all of us. I love you too, honey, and I'm proud of you for admitting when you were wrong and working to make it right." As Brian drove away, I stood in my driveway looking at the house Frank and I had built our life in. For the first time in 2 years, it felt like home again. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Helen next door. "Coffee tomorrow morning?" I want to hear all about how you took down that criminal mastermind. I smiled and texted back, only if you promise to let me tell the story without interrupting. Deal, but I'm making the good coffee. Heroes deserve premium blend. Heroes. I like the sound of that. At 67 years old, I'd discovered I was braver, smarter, and more resourceful than I'd ever imagined. Amanda Miller had taught me something valuable about myself, though not in the way she'd intended. Sometimes the best education comes from the most unexpected teachers, and sometimes the student surprises everyone, including herself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.